We are living in the between times, between the Advents. And so, what do we do within that particular context? Our text today, for this first Sabbath of the Advent season, comes from Matthew 24. As Adventists, that strikes at our heart. This is a clarion call. This is what we are about. It gives us the encouragement, the hope of a coming Jesus. But within the context, and you have the scripture, I encourage you to use it as we look through it. We have within this a context that Matthew is writing to a group of people that are Jewish Christians. We're not sure whether they're part of the dispersion already, probably in Turkey, of today's Turkey, that he's writing to. They are wondering if, in the context of their Jewish heritage, who is Jesus? What is Jesus about? What do we know about him? Since he is writing to a Jewish community, he uses the language and the teachings that they would understand. It opens with a genealogy. The first person on the genealogy is Abraham. Jesus finds his ancestry in Abraham himself. He is Jewish. There's David the king, and there are others that have come along the line. We find Jesus coming out of Egypt. Remember, the wise men that came, they fled to Egypt for protection. Egypt was where the children of Israel came out of. And Matthew has structured his teachings so that there are 5 discourses, in a sense, paralleling the 5 books of Moses: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. Our chapters today are in the 5th discourse that Jesus gives. In the thinking of Matthew, it appears that Jesus is a new Moses or a second Moses, giving new understanding to things. The first discourse, of course, is the Sermon on the Mount, with the Beatitudes, with a call for perfection, ending with a wise man and the foolish man that build their respective houses. The second has to do with travel. The disciples are sent out to travel and to teach. A discourse is given on that in chapter 10. Chapter 13, you have a series of parables that are part of Christ's teaching. In chapter 18, Jesus talks about community. And now in 23, 24, and 25, Jesus' longest teaching is talking about last day things. It begins with a confrontation between the Pharisees, the scribes, and they're all called hypocrites. They're called whited sepulchres. They're called a brood of snakes. Not nice language. And in frustration, where we pick up in our first verse in our text here, Jesus laments what is happening. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets. And it's kind of interesting what he says here. He says, how often I would have gathered you together as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings. But you would not. And then he adds, your house is left to you desolate. Strong language. Indeed, very strong language. There's something interesting in here. As almost a sidelight, I'd like you to note. He's talking about the temple. The temple is about to be left desolate. Where do you see wings in the temple? In the sanctuary of old, they were sketched on the drapes that were hanging around there with gold thread. But where do you see wings? Isn't it in the most holy place? And you see the angels that cover the mercy seat. The mercy seat where we meet God, that protects those that come for mercy. It's an allusion to the temple here. But because of your attitude, because you do not allow mercy to take place, your house is left desolate. And he leaves. The disciples tag along. They find themselves on the Mount of Olives, which is an interesting parallel to the first discourse where Jesus is at the Sermon on the Mount. He says there's coming a day when not one of these stones will be left upon another. We talked about that a couple of weeks ago. The disciples, in this case, come to him and say, when will this happen? And what will be the sign? This is in verse 3 of chapter 24. When and what is our question. Jesus rattles off a number of things that will take place. And it is as though we are reading the Bible in one hand and the newspaper in the other. And we're seeing what matches up are these signs. We hear about earthquakes that will happen and wars, rumors of war, pestilence, famines. You name it, it's there. Gruesome, horrible stuff that will take place. But then you have the words, this is going to happen. But the end is not yet. It isn't those things that are the signs of the end, Jesus is saying. I can remember looking at this and discovering the disciples asking for a sign. And I asked myself the question, where do I truly see the sign? Is it the gospel going to all the world as a witness? Is it the people that are fleeing around Jerusalem when they came to surround the city of Jerusalem and destroyed it and overtook the temple and destroyed the temple? Is that the sign? And if you look down through the text, you do find sign. It isn't in these newspaper items that we have held up for so long. But it was amazing to me to discover it was in the surprise, ready or not, here I come announcement that Matthew 24 gives. You need to turn the page on your document if you're following it. It's in verse 30. After all of these things, finally Jesus uses a word sign. Jesus says, and then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in the heavens. Then the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven. Did you catch what happened here? We want a sign. What are the signs? It's not famines and earthquakes. It's not wars and rumors of war. It's not the tumult that we see. These things happen. These things take place. The amazing thing that I discovered for myself is that the sign of the coming of Jesus Christ was heavens depart as a scroll, surprise, I'm here. And in our scripture of today, Jesus uses the illustration of the flood. As it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be in the last days. They will be eating, they will be drinking, they will be getting married, and they will be giving in marriage. Right up until the very day the flood came. They were unaware, totally unaware of what was happening around them. Surprise, Jesus says, I'm here. Jesus continues to speak to this issue. He adds several other things here. He says, of that day or the hour, you don't know. Now, you know, as Adventists, we have a rich history in looking for the coming of Jesus. of actually setting a time back, almost 150 years ago? It's coming up on almost 200 years. Some of us will celebrate the 200th anniversary of that expectation of the soon coming of Jesus Christ. And we look back and we've used these texts over and over again and saying the coming of Jesus is soon. I can remember a lady in our church who told me that she didn't expect to live until Jesus came. At that particular point, she'd kind of lost hope. She says, as a kid, I never expected to get married. I never did. I thought Jesus would come that quick. Or I never expected to have children, never expected to finish school, never expected to retire. And she was sick, very sick, dying, in fact. And she said to me, Jesus is coming soon. But how soon is soon? It's a conundrum. And when the text tells us no one knows the day nor the hour, the angels, not even Jesus himself, when he spoke these words, it's only in the heart and the hands of God. Now, we excused it as Adventists. We set a time because it said day nor hour. But we do know the month of the year, maybe. And I don't know how many times over the years that I have pastored that I've had letters, epistles come over my desk, more pages than this, handwritten in a scroll that is urgent, predicting a particular day, a month, a year, a time that Jesus is coming, and you've got to be ready, and those dates have come and gone. So what do we do? In the next two parables in the text, the stories in the text, talks about a guy, if he knew when the robber was going to come into his house. Those houses were mud, brick. He would dig into the house, come in, break in a sense, that he would have stayed awake and watched for it. Therefore, Jesus says, watch and be ready, because you know not when the Son of Man is coming. There's one of the master that goes away and leaves the slaves in charge. It says, blessed is the slave. This is verse 46. Blessed is the slave whose master, when he returns, finds him at work when he arrives. Then it talks about the other slaves that are not working and not serving the master, who say, the Lord has delayed. And we're dealing with the issue of delay. So here we are today in this between the times. And what do? We are the church of God in this community. What do we do as the church of God? What are our responsibilities as God's church? What do we do as a people of God facing a delay that is coming? What are our responsibilities? How do we become and continue to be church in this place? Now, you're well between pastors. David Oseguera left 3 months ago. I'm leaving today, my last Sabbath with you. What do you do as a community of faith? What are your responsibilities? How are you God's church here? First of all, do not lose hope that Jesus will come again. But so often we live in that hope in the future. And we live so strongly in that hope that we fail to live in the now, in the today.